What's going on, everybody? Cabana Greg here, and in today's video we're going to be doing another post-platinum review, this time for Mirror's Edge on the PlayStation 3. This is by far one of the hardest platinum trophies that I've ever gone for. So, how did it go?
Ready and wall ride. How does that even happen?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So welcome back to another video here on the channel, and if you are new to the channel here, a post-platinum review is just me talking about a game, its trophy list, so you know, all the various trophies that you can actually earn in that game, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about the game's platinum trophy. Now, I have done some other post-platinum reviews on this channel for Toem, which is a really cute indie puzzle, sort of a photography adventure game. Then you've got Dreams on the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. This was one of the more recent additions to PlayStation Plus. And I also did a post-platinum review for Ape Academy 2, which is another PS Plus extra game. So if you want to check out those post-platinum reviews, I'll leave links to those down below. Guys, if you are new to the channel here, maybe consider subscribing if you want to see more stuff like this. And if you are a returning viewer, you know, as always, super appreciate you coming back for more stuff like this. But as I've already mentioned, today we're going to be taking a look at Mirror's Edge. And this is not a new game by any means at all. Like I'd mentioned, this is on PlayStation 3. Mirror's Edge is a first-person parkour game that was developed by DICE. Yeah, you heard me right, DICE, the same studio that does all of the Battlefield games. So you have this first-person parkouring game where you play as Faith, who is a runner in this sort of dystopian future. And runner, you can kind of think of as like a courier or a carrier of messages, where they're tasked with kind of getting from point A to point B and delivering messages, you know, sort of intel or confidential information, if you will. So that's the basis here. You know, you play as a runner, you play as someone who delivers messages in this dystopian future where a lot of speech and sort of communication is suppressed by the government. And it's a cool setup. I think it's a really cool setup. I didn't really love, though, how the story was conveyed. I don't love the cutscene animations. They're actually kind of like sloppy looking and kind of gross and unsettling. And aside from that, you've got like a pretty decent story, but honestly, I think that the story was pretty weak, and Faith is a cool main character, but she just deserved a better overall game, I think, is the main thing. So yeah, that's a little bit about Mirror's Edge as a game. I enjoy it. I think it has some very good aspects to it. You know, the story is maybe not my favorite thing in the world, but the core gameplay I really enjoyed. And even though there were some technical issues that I encountered with the game, it didn't really detract from my overall enjoyment of the core game. But the real discussion I wanted to have was about Mirror's Edge as a platinum trophy, you know, or Mirror's Edge and its overall trophy list. So the Mirror's Edge trophy list is actually broken up into 3 distinctive sections. You've got your first section, which is of course story mode. Beat the story on hard, get all the collectibles within the story mode. Pretty simple stuff. Now, all the story trophies aren't that difficult. They make up a decent amount of the overall trophy list, but obviously there's still 2 other sections that we have to talk about. The first I'll talk about are the speed runs. You have to not only beat the game on normal, right? Beat the game on hard. You also have to beat each and every single level in Mirror's Edge in the speedrunner mode. So that's the second section of the trophy list, right? We talked about the story, we talked about the speedrunner challenges. The last, though, which I think is the hardest, are the time trials. So you had speedrunner challenges for the individual chapters within the story mode, but then you have these separate speedrun challenges called time trials, where the developers have essentially given you a bunch of pieces of chapters. So like, let's say you'll have the first section of chapter 1, which is like a very, you know, tightly contained circuit that you have to run and beat within a certain amount of time. So again, I think it benefits you to not only do the story mode multiple times, to do the speedrunner challenges first, and then do the time trials, because the time trials are just bits and pieces of, you know, overall sections within the main chapters of the story of the game, right? So if you having that familiarity is only gonna help you even more, because the time constraints are even 10 times more strict. You actually, like, in some levels, you can't make any mistakes at all, or you won't even get 1 star. And we'll talk about the star ratings in just a bit. One other note on the time trials, I would say that it's really imperative that you have a full, complete mastery of the sort of the core tools, the core, you know, gameplay mechanics of Mirror's Edge. And what I would highly recommend you do, if you maybe you haven't thought of this already, go look up a guide. Go look up, you know, chapter 1 speedrun, chapter 2 speedrun, see how the pros are doing it, see how the Mirror's Edge aficionados are doing it, right? So it's honestly more homework than you would expect it to be. At least it was for me, where I was studying how to sort of get through certain levels in the speedrunner challenges. I was learning how to get through some of the time trial challenges, all by learning from others, learning by other people that have done it, learning from speedrunners themselves. There's a great speedrun on GDQ for Mirror's Edge. I'll leave a link to that one down below. Really, really cool speedrun. If you have played Mirror's Edge at all and you really just want to be blown away by how good somebody is at that game, totally check this one out. It's super sick. But without further ado, because I know I've been talking for a bit, let's actually take a look at all the individual trophies that make up Mirror's Edge's Platinum Trophy, and this will hopefully give you an understanding of whether or not you want to go ahead and Platinum Mirror's Edge, maybe some of the main trophies to look out for, and any sort of tips or pieces of advice I can kind of give you as we go through the individual trophies.
Alrighty, everybody, so here we are taking a look at the Mirror's Edge trophy list, and as usual, right, we are on PSN Profiles. And when we're just talking about the base game, right, we're not going to do like the pure DLC content for the game, nothing like that. So just the base game. And if we're looking at just the base game, we've got 33 bronze, 8 silver, 3 gold, and then 1 platinum trophy for a grand total of 45 trophies. Now, I did omit discussing some of the more movement-specific trophies, and we'll get into those later on. But those are pretty easy. I don't think we need to spend too much time on those. I can kind of give you the general chapters to do those in, some of the buttons you might need to press, and things like that. But if you're looking out for those trophies, they'll kind of just come naturally as you're doing the time trials, the speed runs for the chapters, and then the main story as well. So now let's start off with the main story stuff. So as I mentioned in the first part of this video, there are a handful of trophies directly tied to the story. Those would include Back on the Job, the prologue chapter, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And then 9 here and 10. Those are all right, like chapter specific, story specific, and these will just come as you're naturally progressing through the story. There's nothing really abnormal, right? There's nothing out of the ordinary here. Just go ahead and complete that story and you'll net a ton of these trophies right here. The only ones to note, right, would be Pro Runner, which is completing the story on hard difficulty. And a quick thing on the hard difficulty, it is challenging. It is not like the most impossible thing in the world, but I will say that the last chapter is pretty tricky because there's a section where you've got these snipers and they have like perfect aim, so you'll definitely have to do a lot of maneuvering and hiding behind obstacles, finding your opportune moments to, get out of cover and take down the snipers. And then the last section, which is the server room, there is an ideal path that you can take, which will sort of make that final section a lot easier. Personally, what I did was I bared to the right and I used a lot of the natural cover in that final level to kind of just hide when people were shooting me. And once things had calmed down, I would get out of cover, take down an enemy, use their weapon, and sort of clear out the rest of the room. So there are ways that you can make the last section a lot easier, but hard difficulty is going to be challenging. It is not going to be impossible, but it will present a challenge, especially when you're sometimes forced to do combat in this game, which is not the best thing in the world, in my opinion. And then continuing on here with some of the other, story mode-based trophies, there are the bag trophies. So find all 3 bags in one chapter, find 11 hidden bags, and then find all 30 hidden bags. Again, this goes back into the story. Each chapter is going to have 1 to 2 to 3 or even more bags that you'll have to find in order to get this Pack Rat trophy. And so if you ever are lost in terms of like how many of these bags you've collected, maybe you're missing 1 or 2, if you go into chapter select in the main menu, it will tell you exactly how many bags you're missing per chapter. With a lot of these trophies, and I'll mention this later on as well, but for most of these trophies, I am going to be leaving a ton of external materials or additional materials that you can use to help you along with this platinum trophy, because I think for this one, discussing it is important, but also seeing how other people are doing these trophies and how they're, performing these actions, that's the most useful, most beneficial aspect, I think, to going for this platinum trophy. And it makes it a little less intimidating, in my opinion, because you are truly seeing how the actions are performed, and then you try and execute what other people have done. So I'm going to be leaving a ton of YouTube links, videos, guides, and things like that in the description. So please refer to the description if there are any specific, aspects of this trophy list that you need help with, if that includes the speedrunner challenges, the time trial challenges, the bags, right? Please look in the description. More than likely there are links there, as well as some other like fun little supplemental materials that you can use to help you along with this platinum trophy. But this pretty much concludes the story portion here. So there's quite a few, right? There's, definitely, a few trophies here towards the story, towards that, like the 43, trophies that you'll need, 44 trophies that you'll need. And I'm going to come back to these time trial stretches because I actually think it's more beneficial for us to discuss the speedrunner section. So as I mentioned at the top of this video, what I would recommend you do is play the game on normal first, then play the game on hard. And if you play the game right on normal, you'll just sort of get the The regular, chapter-based trophies, completing the story on any difficulty would be the last silver trophy that you would get. And then if you play the game once again on hard, you would net that gold trophy here for Pro Runner. And you can either do the collectibles in your first normal playthrough or your hard playthrough. I'd recommend just do it on your normal playthrough because hard can be challenging, right? And the last thing you want to do is worry about, oh, I gotta get this bag and this section is full of enemies and it's hard to get the bag, whatever. So I would recommend doing that first, right? Normal, do a hard playthrough. And then after that, we should start looking at the speedrun challenges. So as I mentioned at the top of the video, after you complete the story, do the speedrun challenges because once again, you're going to be given in the main menu, whenever you go to chapter select, you're going to be given a timestamp and you have to beat that timestamp in order to qualify, right, to kind of complete the speedrun challenge. So for example, the prologue speedrun would look like 2 or 3 minutes long. So long as you complete that chapter under 3 minutes, you'll get this prologue speedrun trophy. The idea here is that you would want to tackle, well, there's 2 things. One is, I believe, just like in the time trial section, certain time trial levels and certain prologue or, speedrun levels, they're only going to be accessible once you pretty much clear all of the main levels. So one thing to note is either way, you should be playing the story mode first because you're going to unlock all the other time trials later on by completing the story mode. And so you just want to play the story first, but having that familiarity for each chapter is going to help you immensely for each of these speedrun challenge trophies. So you can see there's pretty much every single chapter in the game has a corresponding speedrun challenge, right? And so I think that that's going to be your main thing. If you do the story mode twice, right, for that normal hard playthrough, it's just going to make these trophies a little bit easier. It's not going to make them incredibly easy, definitely not, but it will help you because at the very least you'll know where to go. Maybe you've played around with getting the more optimal routes, the optimal pathings, and it's just going to be a better time, I think, overall. Now, when it comes to talking about the individual speedrun trophies, right, I would say for me, for my own personal experience going through this, I would say chapter 2 was one of the harder ones. I'd say maybe chapter 5, 8, and 9 were some of the trickier ones. And it's funny because there are some great resources out there for these individual speedrun challenges, and I'm going to leave that playlist link down below so you guys can reference the individual speedruns if you're struggling with one over the other. But personally, for example, chapter 2 speedrun, it's a pretty large number from what I remember. I think it's like 11 minutes or something is the estimated time that you need to beat the chapter within. However, there is a really good glitch where you can bypass a huge portion of the level, and I'll leave a link to that down below, but I can't even imagine trying to beat that level without that exploit, because chapter 2 really relies on you kind of climbing down pipes, climbing up ladders, and it just takes a lot of time. And so, I think without that exploit, chapter 2 is pretty rough, and there are a handful of sections near the back half of that level where if you mess up one thing, you pretty much have to restart, because a lot of these speedrun challenges, you can afford to maybe make 1 or 2 small mistakes. But if you make several big mistakes, like maybe you jump off a ledge improperly and you fall to your death, that also contributes to your time. So if you spend like 5 or 6 seconds falling from a building to your death, that's 5 or 6 seconds lost. And if you keep doing that, it's going to make it harder and harder for you to achieve the baseline, right? Like kind of hit the mark for what you need to complete the level within. If you make mistakes, right, and you can't hit that target time that you have to hit, you pretty much have to restart the chapter. And there were instances in chapters 2 and I think 5 and 8 and 9 where I was restarting pretty consistently, especially the last chapter. There is a server room that you have to you have all these enemies that are like rappelling into the server room and they're armed, right? And this is the last section of the chapter, and it's arguably one of the hardest sections of the chapter on the speedrun difficulty. And so there were plenty of times where I was doing really good. I was getting excellent times up until the server room, and then the server room just kind of killed my whole run and I had to restart the entire chapter. So again, I would recommend playing the story twice. I recommend looking at the speedrun challenges before you start the actual speedrun challenge yourself, just so, again, you have a familiarity on where to go, things to be mindful of, and just the ideal pathing for some of these levels. So that's just my one note on the speedrun stuff. Let's actually now go back up to the time trials. So I think the first one is here on the clock. So all of the time trial trophies are from on the clock all the way to still counting. As I've mentioned a billion times, right? Story, speedrun, time trials. The reason you want to do the time trials last is because at this point you'll have done multiple, runs of each chapter within the game. And the time trial sections are literally portions of the main chapters broken up into small increments, and you're basically tasked with completing a short circuit of that individual portion of a chapter. So while the speedrun challenges, right, would have you completing a chapter within 8 minutes, these time trial stretches would involve you completing a portion of a level within 30 seconds, 55 seconds, a minute and a half, right? It might not sound like it's hard, but it is hard. And even for the time trial stretches that were only like 36 seconds or 50 seconds, I thought to myself, oh, 50 seconds, that's pretty easy. And they were some of the hardest time trials that I had to do. The ones in particular that I think are pretty difficult, and I did show some footage of this one, I think in the first part of the video, the shard time trials. So I think there's like shard 1, 2, and 3. They're sort of like the last time trials that you'll unlock, because basically what you have to do is you have to complete other time trials. You have to qualify for other time trials in order to unlock every single time trial in the game. And that's actually this access all areas, which is unlock all time trial stretches. So to unlock a time trial stretch, you have to complete other time trial levels, and then every time you complete a time trial level, you'll unlock, subsequent time trials to go and complete. And while you're going through these time trials, each time trial has a star rating associated to it. So you can either get 1 star, which is you qualifying, right, which is this on the clock trophy, so beat the qualifier time. Qualifier time you can just think of as the very base, like minimum amount of time you need to complete a level. And again, this might sound easy, but some of these levels, you cannot make any mistakes. And whereas we were talking about before, for these speedrun challenges, you can make 1 or 2 small, like baby mistakes, right? But if you make a big mistake, you pretty much have to restart the speedrun. But this differs heavily from the time trials, where if you make 1 or 2 small mistakes, you gotta restart the whole thing. There's no compromise here. And the star ratings are important, right? Because as you can see here, baby steps, A for effort, and still counting, all require you to have a certain star rating, in order to get the trophies. Now, I did want to make one quick note about the star ratings. There is free DLC and there's paid DLC for Mirror's Edge. The free DLC includes 1 time trial level, and the paid DLC, I believe, includes like 8 or 9 time trial levels. So in total, you could add 10 extra stars potentially to this overall time trial rating. So if you want to get the DLC, right, and pay like $5, and get 1 star for each of those levels, technically you could have like 10 stars in addition to whatever you get from the base, like 20 or so speed runs that are in the base game. You don't need to get 3 stars on every single time trial, and more than likely when you first do these challenges, you won't get 3 stars on most of them, or at least I didn't. But I did want to quickly discuss the star ratings because, as you can see, you don't need to get 3 stars on every single time trial, which is going to exponentially, scale the difficulty down for, I think, a lot of people. It did for me, because if you had to get 3 stars on a lot of these time trials, it would be a completely different discussion. And I think overall, I didn't get 3 stars on like 5 levels or something like that, but it was still really hard. This is by far the hardest part of the entire challenge, or the entire trophy list. Don't freak out as much as the star ratings. Just do what I've mentioned. Look up resources online and the stuff that I link in the description. It's going to help you immensely going through each of these time trial trophies. But aside from this, let's actually move to the easy stuff, or the easier stuff, I should say, which is found here. So starting off with Vroom, which is maintain sprint speed for 30 seconds. So you can pretty much do this in any chapter of the game. I did this in chapter 2. I know you can do this in the prologue chapter as well. And a lot of these actually following trophies you can do within the prologue chapter pretty easily. But for me, I did it in chapter 2. There's a section where you're going to vault over some fenced area. You'll go into like this like empty river, like drainage system. And if you go all the way to the back of the sort of like drainage system, you can just run from the very beginning of that section all the way to this like opening that takes you into like the underground, like subway passage area. And that's like a good stretch, I think, for this trophy. So Vroom, chapter 2, or even the prologue, just maintain sprint speed for 30 seconds. There are techniques you can use to get to your max sprint speed like pretty quickly. For example, if you're like looking straight on and then you do a jump and then quick turn, it actually takes you from a sprint speed of 0 to 25. And I think the max sprint speed is like 27 miles per hour. So there are techniques you can use to get to your max speed faster. And then you just have to maintain that speed for 30 seconds. Next here, we've got up, over, under, onwards. So string together the following: a jump, a coil, a slide. So, and specifically over obstacle for the coil and under an obstacle for the slide. So for this, it's pretty easy. You can also do this in the prologue. All you have to do is jump, which on PlayStation, it's the L1 button, and then you have to do a coil. So while you're in the air, if you jump and then hit L2, your legs tuck up underneath you, and that's considered a coil. So you have to do that over an object while you're in the air. And then from there, you have to immediately hit L2 and slide under a nearby obstacle. So the next trophy here is free flowing. This is when you string together a wall run, a jump, and a speed vault. So wall running is pretty much you're just coming up to a wall, and if you hit the jump button near a wall, you'll automatically start to run along that wall. While you're on the wall, if you hit the jump button, what you'll have to do is hit jump and then hit R1, because this will actually turn you closer onto the wall. And then speed vaulting is, again, you have to hit L1 by a wall as well. It's a little tricky to see it, describe it in this sense, but again, I'll leave some supplemental materials. I'll leave some extra links in the description to kind of help you along with the visual aspects of it. Alrighty, so the next trophy here is May I Have This Dance, and you're going to string together a wall run, a turn, a jump, a wall climb, a turn, and a jump. This one's probably one of the more convoluted ones, but there is one time trial where you actually have to do this in order to get an optimal time. But basically, you'll wall run again. So you get up right against a wall. You start, you hit the jump button, you run against the wall. You hit R1 to turn. I think it's like a 180-degree turn. And then after you do a full turn, you'll hit the jump button again off of that wall. And then once you hit the surface of the next wall that you're looking at, you'll hit L1 again to climb up the wall. You'll do another turn, so hit R1 again, and then jump once more. I will definitely, like I said, leave a link to all this stuff down below because it is way easier to see it visually than me to describe it. And so you're basically, what you want to do is find a section where there's two walls right next to each other, right across from one another, and you want to string this stuff together. Next here is And Safe, where you have to string together a wall run, jump, coil, and a skill roll. So a wall run, right? We've already talked about it, just wall run. Once you get to the end of that wall run sequence, you jump. And if there is like a fence or something, right, at the end of that wall run sequence, you just have to make sure you hit L2, right, to coil over that fence or that pipe or whatever it might be. And then from there, a skill roll is basically as you are landing from a pretty high, like height. If you're gonna be falling from a very high like height, right before you hit the ground, you have to hold L2. And your character is going to essentially roll. So ideally you want to do this at a pretty like high off section. And a good location to actually do And Safe is in Playground 2 of the time trial. So you'll see in the time trial section, there's going to be like Playground 1, Playground 2, Playground 3. There's one section pretty early on where you'll jump across some wooden boards and then you'll wall run across this this section. And then at the end of that section, there's going to be a fence that you can jump over and coil over. And then again, at the end of that sequence, you just have to make sure you hold down L2 so you roll. Next here is going to be Head Over Heels, which is complete a chapter of the game without ending up in a heavy landing. So heavy landing goes back into this skill roll portion from And Safe. Basically, when you jump off of a high ledge, a high structure, you always have to make sure to hold down L2 so that you roll at the very end of your fall sequence. If you don't roll at the end of your falling sequence, you're gonna basically get, Faith's gonna take damage and stumble around for a bit. So anytime you're jumping off a ledge, jumping off a high structure, make sure you hold down L2. And so long as Faith rolls instead of, getting hit, essentially that is what happens. You sort of mitigate that heavy landing from happening. So you can pretty much do this in any chapter, but just be mindful of like whenever you're on a high enough structure that you'll want to make sure you hold down the roll button just in case, right? And like it's sort of a more precautionary based thing where just kind of roll to make sure you don't take any damage. And then so long as you complete that chapter without taking damage from a high sort of jump or a drop or anything like that, you're pretty much good to go. So next here is Untouchable, which is complete a chapter without getting shot. So this is the easiest thing to do, I think, in the prologue section. There's way less enemies to deal with. And so what you would want to do is go up to an enemy, disarm that enemy, and then just drop their weapon and don't shoot the gun. And this actually kind of ties into Pacifist, which is complete a chapter without firing a gun, and then Test of Faith, which is complete the game without shooting an enemy. Overall, the gunplay here is pretty weak, and it's not the ideal sort of like reason why you'd want to play this game. The whole idea is you want to play the game for the parkouring mechanics and less about the shooting and the gunplay. But I would recommend, right, anytime you're faced with an enemy, just disarm them, take their weapon, drop the weapon, and move on. Do not shoot the gun, do not shoot an enemy, and by doing that, you will net these 3 trophies pretty easily. And again, if you're doing this on normal, there's really no need for you to shoot enemies. You can just bypass most of them by running and vaulting over stuff. And there's really, again, no need for you to shoot an enemy unless you're just curious to see what the gunplay is like, which I wouldn't recommend anyway. Moving along here, next is Mine, which is perform 15 successful disarms. A disarm is basically when an enemy is about to strike you with their weapon. The weapon's gonna glow in this like red tint. And so long as you press the triangle button while the weapon is red, Faith is going to automatically disarm that enemy and then take them down. So if you just do this 15 times throughout the main story, pretty straightforward, no issues there. And the same goes for Tango Down, which is knock out 20 enemies in melee combat. So melee combat is introduced very early on in the game. You'll go through a tutorial on how to punch and how to block and how to like do like high attacks and low attacks. Essentially what you want to do is just keep taking down enemies. You'll definitely encounter more than 20 throughout your entire playthrough. So just be mindful of sort of the trophies that you need to track for the disarms and the takedowns, and you'll kind of net Tango Down without much effort there. And I would recommend doing this on normal once again, because hard, the enemies are a little bit harder, so it makes it a little bit harder to knock out the enemies personally, because you'll be getting shot out more and take more damage, and it's a little bit trickier when you're doing it on the hard difficulty, in my opinion. And then finally here, we've got some 2 remaining trophies. We got Sweet Goodbye, which has triggered the flip-off move, which is basically when Faith is in midair, she'll stick up her 2 fingers and kind of do the deuces sign. So the way that you do this, it has to be in combat. It has to be with enemies nearby. And so while there are enemies nearby, what you would want to do is find like a high ledge, sort of like an obstacle or a structure you can jump off of. And then while you're in midair, hit R1 to trigger Faith to actually do a full turn. And then while you're in the air, turned around, if you hit R2, which is the melee button, she'll stick her 2 fingers up and kind of say, "See you later." And then the last one here is, "Hey, it's a me." So maybe you can figure out what this is referencing, but essentially you want to execute a stomp move on an enemy. And you can also do this very early on, like prologue, first chapter, I believe is ideal as well. But basically you want to find an enemy that's close by, like a structure that you can jump off of. And essentially when you jump off of this like ledge or obstacle, what you want to do while you're in midair is hit the R2 button so that Faith sort of like kicks the enemy in midair. And if you've done this correctly, you'll get the trophy immediately. But I think ideally what you want to do is jump off of the ledge, make sure you're somewhat over the enemy while you're hitting R2, so that essentially you're doing the kick from above the enemy. So that is going to do it today for the Mirror's Edge trophy list. Overall, it is a very challenging platinum trophy. There are a handful of pretty easy trophies to net. All the story trophies, all of the chaining movements together trophies, those are all pretty straightforward, but the main difficulty, in my opinion, is going to come from the speedrun stuff here. So all the chapters, including the prologue, and then more specifically, the time trials are going to be the pain point for a lot of people. Everything here is doable. It is not an easy trophy list. This for me is like a 9 out of 10 or like an 8.5 out of 10. It's very hard, but it is also very rewarding and very fun, but also like it can be pretty annoying too. But it was a good experience. I hope that when we discuss some of these things here, it's going to help you a little bit, right, with sort of how you can get the remaining trophies you might need to get. And I'm very happy to have the Mirror's Edge Platinum Trophy in my collection of Platinum Trophies. This trophy list is going to be very fun for you if you love to do speedrun challenges, or just, you're into that sort of core gameplay loop. And so 90% of the trophies are really kind of like, a good chunk of the trophies, I should say, are based on speedrunning, getting optimal pathing, sort of figuring out ways to trim down your overall time. And so if you're into that stuff, you're going to have a great time playing Mirror's Edge and going for the Platinum Trophy as well. But that's it, everybody. I hope you found this informative. I hope you found this helpful in any sort of way. Again, I'll be leaving a ton of resources in the description so you can go ahead and peruse the playlists and extra videos that you can use to sort of give you an idea on some of the things to look out for in this trophy list. If you want to see more stuff like this, I'm going to be doing more post-platinum reviews in the future. And once again, guys, just thank you so much for staying around to the very end of the video. I hope to see you all on the next video.